Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept our humble obeisance and glories to the great Administration of Father, glories to you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, good to see you again, Maharaj.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. So, dear devotees, you're all welcome to today's Srimad-Bhagavatam Sangha. We are very fortunate to have the blessings of Maharaj to be with us today. Today happens to be the last day of the month, which is a very beautiful way of ending the month with Maharaj's presence. And so, without further ado, we're going to put the verse on the screen. Maharaj, if you're ready, and then you take it from here.
Okay, thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Tadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanditanscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopeka Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Deving Saraswating Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nashta Prayeshva Vadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. So on this final day of March 2022, we're reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 13, verse 51. And this is Narada Muni speaking. And I am speaking from Singhachalam farm community in southeastern Germany. So the verse, dhṛtarāṣṭra saha bhrātrā gāndhāryā cha sva-bhāryayā dakṣiṇena himavata ṛṣīṇām āśramam gataḥ. Someone's calling at the door, excuse me. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Yes.
Bin ich verkehrt jetzt?
Die andere, ja, aber es wurde entschieden, dass wir doch nicht uns versammeln. Kannst du zu Nandi Mukhi, sie erklärt das.
Hier nebenan, ja?
Ich weiß nicht, wo sie ist, muss ich sagen. Sie ist nicht hier. Ich weiß nicht genau, wo sie ist. Tut mir leid, aber ja, es
Gut.
ist geendet. Ich bin mittendrin jetzt. Ja, tu das zur Seite. Danke.
Dankeschön.
Sorry. Okay. Try that again. Dhṛtarāṣṭra saha bhrātrā gāndhāryā sva-bhāryayā dakṣiṇena himavata ṛṣīṇām āśramaṁ gataḥ. Dhṛtarāṣṭra means Dhṛtarāṣṭra, saha, along with bhrātrā, his brother Vidura, Gāndhārya, Gāndhārī also, cha, and sva-bhāryayā, his own wife, dakṣiṇena, by the southern side, himavata, of the Himalaya Mountains, ṛṣīṇām, of the ṛṣis, āśramam, in shelter, gataḥ, he has gone. Translation, O king, your uncle Dhṛtarāṣṭra, his brother Vidura, and his wife Gāndhārī have gone to the southern side of the Himālaya Mountains, where there are shelters of the great sages. And Srila Prabhupada's short purport: to pacify the mourning Maharaj Yudhishthira, Narada first of all spoke from the philosophical point of view, and then he began to describe the future movements of his uncle, which he could see by his foreseeing powers, and thus began to describe as follows. Mukam karati vachalam bangum langayate girim yat kripa tamaham vande Shri Gurun Dīnataranam. This chapter is in some ways a microcosm of the first canto as a whole, in that it includes within it an important return and meeting, and then a departure. So there's meetings and there are departures. There's several meetings and several departures going on in the first canto as in introduction to the Bhagavatam as a whole, in which there will be more meetings and more departures. Samboga and viyoga, some yoga, viyoga, and samboga, viraha. So it's kind of representing in some ways the whole first canto, and then in a sense a microcosm of the whole Bhagavatam. Vidura has been on pilgrimage. He is returning. According to one writer, Vidura would have been away for a long time, for 30 years. He left just before the war and continued to travel and wander. There's very little said about his wanderings, but there is an interlude in his wanderings when he meets first Uddhava and then Maitreya. And his talks with Maitreya extend for most of Canto 3 and all of Canto 4. And through Maitreya, then we hear from others. So Vidura is returning now to returning home after the war, long after the war, to see his brother, or half brother, Dhṛtarāṣṭra. And of course, it's in this chapter that he makes his very forceful, what we like to call preaching to Dhṛtarāṣṭra, that it's now time for you to give everything up and prepare yourself for the end of life. And Vidura speaks very straightforwardly to him in such a way that he persuades him. He persuades Dhṛtarāṣṭra to do as he advises. That's a sort of motif, persuasion and dissuasion, I want to come back to. We can explore some more for discussion. He persuades him to go, and so he does, and as Narada makes his timely appearance, as Yudhishthira is just discovering that his uncle and aunt have left. Just then Narada appears, and as Prabhupada says in the purport, he first of all gives philosophical exposition on the necessity of detachment, considering the reality that our relationships in this world are so temporal. So he speaks briefly to that point, and then he makes, in the next few verses, some description, which are going to be, as again Prabhupada says, in anticipation. Narada's qualification is trikalagnya. He sees into the future, and so he knows that he knows where Dhṛtarāṣṭra is going. He knows what he's going to be doing to prepare himself to give up his life. And he says then he will be giving up his life quite soon. So he's not, we say in English, beating around the bush. He's saying very straightforward, this is the situation. So he's being truthful. Anudvega karamvakyam satyam priyahitam chayat, speaking the truth. There's something else going on in this chapter. I would say we have three examples of very strong affection. Vidura has strong affection for Dhṛtarāṣṭra. Otherwise, why would he come back, and why would he speak to him so strongly for his benefit that he should leave? And we read in today's verse that Narada reports that Vidura accompanies Dhṛtarāṣṭra to the Himalaya. So Vidura is one example of affection, he feels strong affection for Dhṛtarāṣṭra. We could also mention maybe the other way around, how much the Pandavas and all of the palace are so happy to see Vidura. And so we get this famous verse, what is it? Bhavad vida bhagavatas tirtha bhuta svayam prabhu tirtani bhutani, that you are yourself a pilgrimage place. Because why? Because the Lord is situated in your heart, so that makes you, wherever the Lord is, that's a place of pilgrimage. the Lord is in your heart, you're a place of pilgrimage. And so the devotees recognize that. Yudhishthira, I believe, speaks that verse. Another example of strong affection expressed is Sanjaya. Sanjaya, we understand, is Dhṛtarāṣṭra's secretary. It's Sanjaya who has communicated to Dhṛtarāṣṭra the Bhagavad Gita, but he's been with him, it seems, from early on, and he has some. We might be surprised. We may think, well, this Dhṛtarāṣṭra, wasn't he such a rascal? He was, he was allowing his son Duryodhana to have his way, and all of this led to the war and so on. Well, yes, that is there, and at the same time, because the Bhagavatam is there is depth. It's not two-dimensional, so it's indicating that it's presenting characters. It's presenting personalities as having depth. Yes, they may be foolish, they may be weak. Dhṛtarāṣṭra seems to have been more weak and foolish than evil. He was attached to Duryodhana. That was his weakness. But there's this strong affection. Vidura, Sanjaya. And then Yudhishthira. And this even more so, we may be surprised. Why would Yudhishthira have affection for the very person, his uncle, who seemed to want him, Yudhishthira, to be destroyed so that his son and his other sons could prevail? So this is the Bhagavatam. It's, again, first canto, and much of what's happening in the first canto is giving a purport to the Mahabharata, saying that just see how these great persons of the Mahabharata, whatever they may seem to have been and however they may have acted, what we should understand on a deeper level is that these were or are great devotees of Lord Krishna. And because they're great devotees, they have great feelings. They have noble emotions. They are of the noble type, not the lowly type, not the kripanas. They are brahmanas in the sense of, or mahatmas in the sense of broad-minded and having deep feelings of affection. So that's basically what's happening in super summary form, turbo summary, in this chapter. But what sort of prompts me as I look at this is a subject which I started, how long ago? Some years ago. I was kind of exploring a topic that struck me about the Bhagavatam. What we see in the Bhagavatam is a lot of passages in which someone is speaking to someone else in order to persuade them of something, to put it in very abstract terms. And this persuading is sometimes persuading to do something and sometimes persuading to not do something. or what we say in English, to dissuade someone from doing something. So in the context of this chapter, we might, the immediate example of persuasion, of course, is Vidura persuading Dhṛtarāṣṭra to leave for the forest. And if we would sort of wind back the time, the Mahabharata time, prior to the war, what is Vidura doing? He's trying to dissuade Dhṛtarāṣṭra from allowing his son, Duryodhana, to pursue his path of destruction. He's trying and he fails. Now he's trying to persuade and he's successful. And as I said, there are actually quite a number. Back then, I started making a few notes of examples of this. But what I want to do now is to little bit do the churning. The milk ocean was churned. So Bhagavatam churning, see what all we can come up with as examples of persuasion and dissuasion. Specifically, what we're looking for is where someone is persuading someone else to act, to do something, or someone is persuading someone else to not do something. And so, of course, you can say the whole Bhagavatam is persuading us to surrender to Krishna, remember Krishna always, and so on. But more specifically, in terms of the stories, the narratives, let's see what we can come up with, shall we? Anyone want to volunteer with one example that comes to your mind? It may help you to just mentally sort of go through cantos, canto 1, canto 2, canto 3, like that, and think, okay, there's this one speaking to that one, and so on. So if I can open it up at this point.
Well, so if anyone has anything to share, please just unmute and then you go ahead.
Yes.
All right, I would say, I don't think this is from the Bhagavatam, but Krishna persuaded Arjuna to fight the battle for the Kurukshetra war. Arjuna didn't want to, but Krishna persuaded him.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good starting point because it's so clearly an example. Of course, it's not Bhagavatam directly, but it's certainly related.
Sorry about that. Yes, so anyone else? Anandamayi, do you have something to say?
Whoops, there we go again. Yeah, okay. Please speak up, anyone.
Yes, please do.
Don't be shy. You've all been reading Bhagavatam, so we have.
Well, Maharaj, I would say, in the Bhagavatam, we just finished discussing about how Vidura had initially attempted to persuade Dhṛtarāṣṭra. No, I would say had attempted to dissuade Dhṛtarāṣṭra from acting the way he was acting, and he was unsuccessful until it got to a point he was successful to persuade him to leave home to go to Himalaya.
Yes, I was also mentioning that. It's interesting.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
Good. Anyone else?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, please. Yeah, go ahead. Srimad-Bhagavatam.
I noticed you are disactivating me several times. Okay. Dandavat Pranam Maharaj. There is the Vasudev dissuading Kamsa not to kill Devaki.
Oh, okay. That's an amazing that's an amazing case of dissuasion, isn't it? What we might call fast thinking. The situation was extremely critical, and Vasudeva was on the spot with just the right things to say to dissuade Kamsa from killing his cousin sister. Anyone else? Okay, so that was 10th canto. Do we want to go to any others from earlier?
But can IPEC please unmute and then go ahead.
Hare Krishna, it's a simple example, but in the first canto, Queen Kunti is trying to dissuade Krishna from leaving.
Oh, okay. Is she actually trying to dissuade him from leaving? She's offering prayers, and maybe she's expressing some sadness that Krishna's leaving. I wonder if I don't remember verses where she's actually trying to dissuade him from leaving, but maybe there are.
I remember thinking clearly that it's a request for both expressing sadness and also kind of dissuasion, I thought, but I should also check.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, sadness.
Please, when you're done speaking, remember to mute yourself. Please.
Can I come up with?
Oops.
I think you wanted to say something. Please unmute.
Sure.
You wanted to say something. Unmute.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Please.
Can we mention the case of Narada persuading, if I can say this, the word persuading, Vyasadeva to write about Krishna's pastime?
Oh, okay. Yes, why not? Someone might argue that, well, that's a kind of special case of persuasion, because it seems like Vyasa was ready to go and he just needed a confirmation. But I would agree, because I mean, there are several verses of Narada speaking on that point, and so certainly it is a kind of persuasion. Yes, thank you.
Dear Lalita Devi, please unmute.
Hare Krishna, thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj.
Thanks.
Well, I have two examples, I think, of persuasion where Lord Krishna as Matsya persuaded. I've forgotten. Is it Priyavrata?
Satyavrata.
Satyavrata. I beg your pardon. That he persuaded him to keep him, to save him first from the small pot to the larger pot. And then
Yes.
Yeah. And another one is that Krishna persuaded or dissuaded Nanda Maharaj to not to do offerings to Indra, but to do offerings to Govardhan.
Yeah, that's a famous example of we can say a combination of dissuasion and persuasion. And what's possibly particularly interesting in that case is what is the content of his argument? And of course, we understand it's not really so much Krishna's argument that persuades Nanda Maharaj, is it? It's just the fact that he's Krishna and he's his son and he's so sweet and so charming and this is what he wants. So, okay, we'll do it.
Well, Krishna was playing in the card of sentiment and love of his father.
Yeah, and it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek sort of argument that Krishna's giving. It's a kind of parody, I would say, of karma mimamsa philosophy. So Krishna's just having some fun. Oh, okay, and
Nitya Kishore, please unmute.
Hare Krishna. Dissuasion, 3 examples. First example is that Lord Shiva was telling his wife Sati not to go on this gathering ceremony of her father. The second example, that Narada Muni was telling Dhruva Maharaj that he's just a boy, that he shouldn't do these austerities and he should leave the forest. And the third example of dissuasion is that Lord Krishna told gopis when they came that they should go to their home.
Interesting, because all 3 examples that you give are failed dissuasions. Lord Shiva tries to dissuade Sati from going to the yajna, but he fails. She goes anyway. She just ignores it and leaves. And Narada tries to dissuade Dhruva Maharaj from continuing his ways as a young boy of yoga, and then and Krishna tries to dissuade the gopis from staying in the forest, and he fails. Of course, in the last case, at least if we take seriously Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, in which he shows how when Krishna seems to be saying, go home, he's actually saying, stay here. He analyzes the Sanskrit in a different way. And if we take that, then Lord Krishna's dissuasion is also just playful. He's just playing, sort of playing with the gopis.
Munindra Gana, please, you may unmute.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
There is also where was convinced from Varaha, from Varuna, that not because he is too old.
I missed the very beginning of that. I don't.
He
was convinced.
Who was convinced?
Hiranyaksha.
Oh, okay.
Hiranyaksha
Right. Was convinced from Varuna that he should fight with Vishnu, that he is a better battle for him.
Oh, okay. Okay, good.
Maharaj, we read about when Ashwatthama did all his horrible atrocities. The Pandavas really wanted to kill him, like a physical death. Bhima particularly wanted to kill him. And then his wife, Draupadi, discouraged him. I don't know if that could be considered a dissuasion. And if it is, she was actually successful in that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yes, that's a nice example. That's a very special case in that Arjuna found himself between Draupadi on one side and Krishna on the other side, with Draupadi saying, don't kill him, and Krishna saying, kill him, and you have to satisfy both of us. Which, I mean, this is just sort of an aside point, but all these things, all of these episodes relating to the Mahabharata, it could be interesting to compare how it's told in the Bhagavatam with how it's told in the Mahabharata. As I remember reading, because most devotees are only familiar with abridged Mahabharata, and many devotees read as an abridged Mahabharata Krishna Dharma Prabhu's Mahabharata, which is very nice. But one should be aware that when there's a difference, he told me personally, when there's a difference between how something's described in the Bhagavatam and something is the same as described in the Mahabharata, Krishna Dharma Prabhu brings the Bhagavatam version in and replaces the Mahabharata version. So, as I remember from reading the unabridged Mahabharata, in that particular case, the incident with Ashvatthama, what to do about him, should he be killed, should he not be killed? Lord Krishna himself curses Ashvatthama to wander alone for 3,000 years. That's the curse. Now that doesn't necessarily go against the Bhagavatam. We could say that both apply. That Arjuna prepares him to wander alone by defrocking him, by removing the jewel, cutting his hair, basically outcasting him. And then he is sent on his way. He is outcasted. That's all details. Okay, more persuasion and dissuasion. I see.
Ravinda Devi, please unmute.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Please accept my obeisances, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. Oh gosh, trying to keep my note. I was trying to hold the information in my head. So Dhṛtarāṣṭra, in your communication, was affected by weakness, and that overcame his ability to do what is correct, what is dharmic. And in doing so, much calamity happened, even to the point where his own desires and intentions that he chose to use Sanjaya to foresee, he did not get his desire. So, would you relate or elaborate further on the aspect of detachment and how in weakness And detachment relates to this process of bhakti, because we do know that it's not a bad thing to care for, love, protect, and serve. But when it comes to the point that it's affecting one's actions and integrity, spiritually and otherwise, then that's the imbalance that creates this mood of understanding detachment from the perspective of it affecting one's spiritual life, and basically how others are affected as well. But that attachment is not a bad thing. It's when you need to detach from that aspect that relates to not being Krishna or doing what should be done.
Okay, let me think. How can we get at this? So attachment is always there, and it's a question of steering our attachment in the right direction. Maybe that's what we want to say. And we might think that it's steered in the right direction when actually it's not. And to correct the direction, that's why we keep our ears open, especially for the direction, the advice, the guidance of other devotees, senior devotees, sadhus, Shastra Guru. And I like to remember one feature of yoga, just physical yoga, asana yoga, is flexibility. At least in modern yoga, classical yoga, they didn't seem to worry much about all these contortions, but anyway, in modern yoga, they do all these contortions and such. And a lot of it has to do with developing physical flexibility. And so on a spiritual level, this a similar principle seems to be there, and that we need to be ready to make adjustments to hit the target, what are we aiming for? We're aiming for Krishna, and this means being ready to adjust ourselves. Many times I've given the example of sailing. Anyone who knows about sailboats, how do you sail a sailboat which has no motor, doesn't have any oars? You can only depend on the wind. How do you go against the wind? If you want to get to the other side of a lake and the wind is blowing from that opposite side, you might think it's not going to be possible to get to the other side because you need wind to be behind you, right? Yes, no. Actually, a good sailor knows how to do what's called tacking, which is sailing at a more or less 45-degree angle against the wind for some time, and then tacking 90 degrees in the other angle, still 45 degrees against the wind. Back and forth, you get to the goal. You get to the opposite side, even though the wind was blowing from that opposite side that you wanted. So I think sometimes of Bhakti Yoga as being an expert sailor, ready to make adjustments. And of course, if the wind changes changes direction, then one has to make immediately new adjustments to the sailboat. So spiritual life has two aspects. One is that which is not changing, and one which is constantly changing. We have eternal truths, we may like to say, are beyond change, which we are pursuing. And we're in a world which is constantly changing. It's called Jagat because it's constantly in flux. And we worship Jagat not. In other words, Jagannath. Jagat not becomes Jagannath. Okay, that's briefly, and therefore, in relation to persuasion, dissuasion, yeah, we want to be allow ourselves to be open to being persuaded to change our minds about something that we thought we were so sure about. Yeah. I hope that gets something to the subject.
Oh my goodness, so much, Maharaj. I can't even begin to tell you how much that truly, truly, truly just hit all.
Yeah, that's so sweet. Jagat means Jagannath.
Yes, that's right.
Dira Devi, please, you have something else to share? Go ahead. Dira Lalita, yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh, sorry. Well, I do have something to share regarding persuasions. I have a couple of things, if that's okay. So from the 8th canto, we have a Krishna as a Mohini Murti persuaded Asuras to trust her like 108%. And that in order that they would just listen to Mohini Murti, and she put him to sit very far away before she started distributing nectar. That's one. And then I have another one, but I'm not sure if that's really persuasion, where Putana persuaded Mother Yashoda, or was that cheating, to give her baby Krishna to nurse him. I'm not sure.
I don't know. Does she say anything, or does she just walk in and take Krishna in her lap?
But with her false appearance, it's like sort of persuasion without the words, I was thinking.
Okay, yeah. Just by her appearing, that's okay.
And then one more I have, I apologize. And it's a, well, this is not from Srimad-Bhagavatam, but that I thought of, this came to me, the Srila Prabhupada persuaded that lady in the cargo ship ticket office to give him a ticket for America.
Yes. Sumati Morarji.
Sumati Morarji, yeah, I forgot her name.
Yeah. And part of his persuasion, certainly an important part, was his persistence. He was sitting in front of her office and waiting and waiting and waiting. And she saw, first she rejected his proposal, right? She said, you're an old man. This is not something for you to do. You can't do this. Forget it. But Prabhupada persisted, and she saw his determination.
So he persuaded Mrs. Morarji by his determination.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, this, one thing I find interesting is one could do a whole analysis of and perhaps even a diagram of different sorts of persuasion. What sort of arguments are made, and how is it that these arguments work? And how is it when arguments don't work? And what are the factors in all of this? You could make a whole analysis.
Yes, Maharaj, actually I was thinking about, is it possible we give the definition of persuasion? Then from there we can really figure out whether this situation that took place was as a result of persuasion, or like maybe somebody just giving advice and somebody following the advice. So I think what you're saying, persuasion may have different angles to it.
Of course, yes. And for that reason, I would be cautious about making definitions, because there's a danger that definitions leave something out that you might want to include. But what would be probably good is to see what sort of a spectrum there is. You know, there's, mild persuasion, intense persuasion, persuasion based on things other than argument, and so on. You could have a whole catalog.
Yeah, because giving a definition will definitely limit your scope. Definitely.
Yes.
Rendra Gopal Das, Prabhu, please unmute.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj, Hare Krishna, dear devotees. I have one example of persuasion and dissuasion. In one case, this is 6th canto. Narada Muni is dissuading the sons of Daksha, the Haryashvas, and then later Shavalashvas.
Yeah.
And persuading them to take sannyas.
Yeah. Good example. Yeah.
Yamuna Devi, please unmute.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, I'm in my mind with Prahlad Maharaj. When Prahlad Maharaj was in the womb of his mother, Narada Muni was trying to dissuade Indra to kidnap the mother, if I'm right. And also later on, Prahlad Maharaj is persuading his schoolmates to try to worship the Lord. And we also see that his father, Hiranyakashipu, is dissuading Prahlad Maharaj from worshipping the Lord.
You're trying to. He's not very successful. Yes, good. To the first example, of course, Narada is successful. He successfully persuades Indra to let him, Narada, give shelter to his mother, Kayadu. And then the other two examples you gave were failed attempts, right? Hiranyakashipu trying to persuade or dissuade Prahlad from worshipping Vishnu. Prahlad trying to persuade, I would say, Hiranyakashipu to give up his ways and, as Prabhupada says, go to Vrindavan. So neither is willing to accept the persuasion of the other. And it finally leads to a showdown with the Lord appearing in his special, very persuasive form.
Thank you, Maharaj. Hare Krishna, Srimad-Bhagavatam, please unmute.
Hare Krishna. Two other examples of persuasion and dissuasion. Bali Maharaj trying to dissuade, Shukracharya, the guru of the demons, trying to dissuade Bali Maharaj from offering the 3 pieces of land to Vamanadev.
Yes.
And then the second one, the sages, the demigods, persuading Vishwarup, the sage Vishwarup, to give up his body so that they can use his bone as a weapon against the demons.
Yeah, that's a quite humorous one because it's Tvashta, isn't it? When they approach him, he kind of plays with them in that case. He just has some fun with them. He's perfectly willing to give up his body, but initially he acts like he's not going to do it. So that's a fun example. And the example of Shukracharya trying to dissuade Bali Maharaj from giving the land to Vamana is also a very kind of a classic example of failed dissuasion. Why? Because Bali Maharaj is quite thoroughly persuaded otherwise that it's a good idea. I always like the way Prabhupada tells the story. He says that Shukracharya is saying, don't do it, this is Vishnu, he wants to trick you. And then Bali Maharaj's reply, as Prabhupada puts it, is, well, if it's Vishnu, let him trick me. Let me be cheated. I think he says it like that. And then let me be cheated by Vishnu. That will be very nice.
Thank you. Can we approve Prabhu? Please unmute.
Yeah, Prabhu, thank you very much. Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Jai Jai.
Yes, Maharaj. So my own example is from Gaura Lila. That was one I will try. We say, I don't know whether it's persuasion, but when Dhṛtarāṣṭra Prabhu called for the Lord to appear, and also there is the other one when the Lord Nityananda dissuaded in a trickish way from Lord Chaitanya Prabhu to go to Shantipur instead of going to Vrindavan, and also when the devotee also dissuaded Lord Chaitanya from traveling many times before he finally traveled. So I don't know whether some of them are in line with whatever we're discussing, Maharaj.
Yeah, no, that's nice. Yeah, that's a nice example of Advaitacharya persuading the Lord to appear. Again, what is the kind of essential ingredient of his persuasion? We may say it's his superhuman, certainly, his divine intensity of desire that the Lord appear. And so he pleads with him. The second example of, I don't know if I got how you were presenting it, but the whole thing of Lord Chaitanya wanting to go to Vrindavan and Advaitacharya. Yeah.
Nityananda.
Nityananda.
Nityananda
tricks him.
He told the coward boy to tell Chaitanya, Prabhu,
Right.
Mahaprabhu, this is Vrindavan.
Yeah. So there's some tricks going on there, some tactics of confusion and tricking. Well, there's so many examples. I mean, we could go on and on, I think. What I wanted to do, and I hope this was serving its purpose, is to alert everyone that this is one way to kind of keep, this is something you can be aware of in reading, Shastra in general, narrative shastra, where someone is speaking to someone else. And basically, it's about persuading to do something or to not do something. There's some action involved as a result. I would say that would be part of my, if we had to have a definition. Of course, one can also persuade one to change one's ideas. And we can say that's what Srila Prabhupada is doing all the time in his preaching. He is changing our ideas, our way of seeing the world from world minus Krishna to world full of Krishna. Anyway, so that's just some thoughts. And I kind of took this chapter as a whole as a kind of springboard to explore that. So thank you all very much.
Well, thank you, Maharaj. Maharaj, please, I have quite a few number of questions. Even though it's amazing, Srila Prabhupada wonderfully gave a very short purpose to this text, but you found a way of engaging all of us, and it's very interesting. Now, my first question is, I knew that Krishna was responsible for Ashwatthama's suffering, being on earth. And I understand he has like full of sores all over his body, and his body doesn't smell good because of the curse that Krishna gave him. Some people translate Sanjivani as immortal, but it appears Sanjivani is not immortal, just that they have a long life to live, but obviously they're going to die at some point. And until today, I did not know that Ashwatthama was cursed to live for 3,000 years. And if Ashwatthama was cursed to live for 3,000 years, why then do we continue to say that he's still in the Himalayas when the curse pronounced on him had been 5,000 years ago, and he's only to live 3,000 years ago? That should mean that he's no more here. Am I right?
Well, I don't know if I could give a satisfactory answer to that one. Yeah. What to say? All I can say is, if I meet Ashwatthama somewhere, I'll ask him what happened. Yeah.
Well,
but I do know it was a curse, because someone might say, well, live for 3,000 years, that sounds like a blessing to live so long. No, it was a curse because he had to live alone. He was an outcast. He was like, the monster created by Frankenstein. That in Mary Shelley's famous novel, the monster, who is often confused, and people think the monster's name is Frankenstein, but no, he was the creation of Dr. Frankenstein. He was so much suffering because he looked quite horrible, and so no one wanted to have anything to do with him. They were frightened. And this was extremely painful to him because he wanted companionship. He's actually referred to in the novel as a vegetarian. But he becomes a psychopath. He ends up murdering, I don't know, 2 or 3 people out of his anger and frustration. Why am I talking about Frankenstein? Because Ashwatthama seems like a kind of Vedic Frankenstein's monster.
Well, thank you, Maharaj. I hope we don't find Ashwatthama, because I understand he doesn't smell good. But
maybe that's what keeps him. That's what keeps him alone. Nobody wants to be near him.
Yeah, nobody wants to have association.
No, so bad.
All right. See, I have a question from the text itself.
Uh-huh.
And the text we discussed today. Let me see if I can pull it up here. It says, this is Narada Muni speaking. Quote, your uncle Dhṛtarāṣṭra, his brother Vidura, and his wife Gāndhārī have gone to the southern side of the Himalaya Mountains, where there are shelters of the great sages. Now, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada spoke, and when you were also speaking, you talked about like Tritarastra, because Narada Muni knows the past, present, and the future. And so he could tell what Dhṛtarāṣṭra was going to be doing. And so from verses 52 onwards, he will be describing what Dhṛtarāṣṭra will be doing. My question is, how does one know ahead of time what someone else is going to be doing?
Oh.
If we are not robots, if we are not being manipulated, if we are not programmed to behave in a particular way, how does one foretell that this person is going to behave this way, that way, and they do happen? So should we then conclude that we are programmed to think, to act the way we think and act?
Okay, well, that's a real stump the Swami question. Okay. The short answer is no, we shouldn't think like that, because all of Shastra, the whole purpose of Shastra is it's based on the presupposition that we do have free will, and that because we have free will, by hearing Shastra, we can be persuaded to change our ways. That's a basic understanding of our tradition. So then, still, your question: if that's not the case, though, how does one see what somebody's going to do in the future? I would say maybe just by example of sort of everyday life, we may want to just look at, people we know and how they behave. And we know them enough that we're pretty sure what they're going to do in a certain situation, because that's what they always do. Now, in this case, Dhṛtarāṣṭra doesn't always go to the Himalaya and give up his body, you can say. But Narada may be enough insightful into his ways. And it could be that Narada knows enough from his previous life. So what I'm trying to say is, we all function based on patterns of behavior, our own patterns of behavior and the patterns of others' behavior. And one could say that's a kind of trikalagya, small time. And it's understood. Sages take that capacity that we all have, and they're able to extend that further. That may be one way to understand. Another way of understanding, though, gets into mystical ideas, or even some would say quantum physical ways of understanding the nature of time. That time is not linear, that it can be bidirectional in some way. It's all beyond my understanding, but there's any number of philosophers who have, and mystics who express something like this, something about actually seeing something in the future. Then we can also just say, well, aside from putting aside predestination, there is one omniscient being who is the Supreme Being. His knowing what will happen is somehow based on his allowing what will happen. And he can also allow someone else to see something of what will happen. But that's as far as my brain takes it. Sorry. And speaking of brain, my brain is starting to go into retirement mode right now.
Okay, Maharaj, yeah. What's your time there in Germany? Like 6 o'clock?
It's 6:15. It's not so late, but
yeah,
nevertheless.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here and enlivening, blessing us, and educating us.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure.
We always love hearing from you, Maharaj. I think I'll catch you shortly in the Gāndhārī forum also. I saw you were scheduled to speak at Gāndhārī forum.
Yes, I spoke a few days ago, Bhagavatam class, and
I was there.
Sarvatma scheduled me for
Yes,
another session coming up sometime soon.
Yes. That's my temple.
That's your temple.
That's my temple. Thank you so much, Maharaj. Next time I will have another question for you. It's a question I've been trying to get answer from various devotees, and I haven't had an answer to it yet. And actually, I think I should have asked that question first, because it was a question I had prepared it down for you. And I started asking other questions, and you have to go. So next time.
Next time.
Yes, next time. Yes.
Okay.
Kamiganapur, do you want to say something, Maharaj, just to go?
Yeah, I just want to appreciate Maharaj for engaging our intellect in browsing through all the scriptures to bring out all this persuasion and dissuasion. Thank you very much, Maharaj. It's very nice of engaging our devotees in the collection. Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.
Maharaj, we have a ritual we perform here. That is, before the class formally comes to a close, we humbly request all the devotees to unmute themselves, and then we chant Big Hare Krishna Maha Mantra to express our appreciation to our speaker. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Gaur Premanande, Haribo.
Maharaj ki jai.
Jai.
Srimad-Bhagavatam ki jai.
Jai.